right, welcome back to the Nexus Podcast. I'm at S4 with Gus Serino. How you doing, Gus? Good to meet you.
Good, you as well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did a great talk this morning on a collaborative you did with some water utilities in Massachusetts, and I definitely want to hear about that. But just for context sake, let's set the stage. Just bring me inside some of the difficulties, the challenges that water utilities are having around cybersecurity. I know that most of them in the country are relatively small. So
that's right. And currently at this point, there's no or very few regulations. Some are starting to come on a state level. There's stuff in Congress on a federal level, but there's really not much in the way of requirements, regulatory, and there's 55,000 community water systems out there, and most of them, like 47,000 of that 55, are really small, under-resourced. They don't have, they're borrowing an IT person who does the police, the fire department, the town hall, the schools, who doesn't want to touch the water. So in terms of technological maturity, they're really low. The water systems managers, they're focusing on things like PFAS and water quality issues. And, even if they recognize that there's an issue with cybersecurity, it's not really ranking in their order of priority. But for our community, we recognize that there's a real risk here. We're looking at Volt Typhoon and some of the pending issues coming there, and we're trying to get at least, the low-hanging fruit taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing resembling an OT team.
Nothing. No. Yeah, they rely on outsourced systems integrators to handle the programming of the control system. Cybersecurity is never really, or very rarely, part of the conversation there.
So is it a knowledge issue, a money issue? Like you mentioned, it's a lot of IT folks kind of absorbing a lot of these extra duties.
So it's both, right? So because there's no regulations, there's no driver to get money. It's also a staffing issue.
Yeah.
And these organizations, and rightly so, they are driven by the regulations, and so that's where the issue is. Even if they recognize that this is an issue and they want to work on it, they don't know what to do, and they're looking for help, and that's what we're trying to do.
So, devil's advocate, I work for a 500, a small community water utility. Am I really a target? Should I really pay attention? I mean, obviously the answer is yes. It's a critical infrastructure, but there's that attitude, I suppose. From
a strategic point of view, no, you're probably not a target, but that's not how it's working these days.
Right.
Anything sitting on the internet's findable on Shodan, and there's, so I can't say if you're really a target, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do basics, right? Taking things off the internet, change the default passwords, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Shodan, the enumeration of devices that are facing the internet. It's a real problem. It's a real issue, and it's the launch pad for all these attacks.
It absolutely is, and that's the problem where people think, well, why would anybody go after me? We're a small utility of 500 people, but when you are findable, exploitable on Shodan, they're going to go after you just because they can.
Yeah, it's at scale and easy. Yeah. All right, so tell me about the collaborative. How did this come about? And you told a bit about the story during your talk, but
yeah. So one of my clients was one of these he was a DPW director of a town, and he had the water underneath his jurisdiction, and he was one of these folks who recognized this is something we need to get ahead of, and so he engaged me through grant funds to help build them a cybersecurity program. We were on a conference. Is that okay? Okay. We were on a virtual conference in Massachusetts about cybersecurity, and we saw a presentation on an IT collaborative doing something similar, where they were multiple municipalities banded together to try to, efficiently address their IT challenges, cost sharing and leveraging.
Yeah.
Buying power and things like that. And so we thought it was an interesting approach, and we wanted to see if we could try that for securing water utilities. And so we went for the grant, and we got it, and that's basically how it happened. We had 8 water utilities essentially sign on in the grant process. Some of them dropped off in being active, and we're just trying to move it forward. And I actually think based on what I've seen, taking a one-to-many, one sort of cyber OT person who's knowledgeable, helping these utilities who are looking for prioritization help, it's a good way for us to help efficiently move the needle forward with,
So what's happening between the collaborative? Like, how are they working together? Is it just a pooling of resources or information sharing? Like,
it's more information sharing and trust building, and I think as time goes on, there'll be a more almost like a mutual aid. But that really hasn't materialized at this point. We're having meetings. We're on board with the project and what we're trying to do, and we're building trust. And at this point, the one sort of most cost-effective way we've been able to help across all of them is with security monitoring. We got a relatively maintainable, sustainable, cost-effective security monitoring strategy in place to help. Other stuff is really just more information sharing, understanding the threats and the risks and things like that.
So how do they all make use of the monitoring solution there?
So the grant had enough funding. We went out to bid. We came up with requirements that we thought we needed to make this sustainable, not introduce security vulnerabilities, and provide the right help.
Yeah.
And so we went out to bid and got a solution that's doing that. And so that was the one thing we could do scalable across all of the utilities because of the different architectures and whatnot. We could do this in a do no harm kind of approach. And some of the other security controls we put in place weren't necessarily the best recommended practice because it's maybe a little too complicated or too expensive.
Sure.
And so we did reasonable protective controls, but we sort of augment that with detection capability, and it helps us feel like we're in a better spot.
Yeah, so you mentioned do no harm a couple of times. Dig into that a little bit for me in terms of what you mean.
Yeah, so those small utilities and the medium-sized utilities, they don't have the technical resources, and as security providers go in and we put in technology to kind of add security, we all know that it makes regular operations harder. And the one thing we can't do is try to solve a low-frequency, high-impact problem. Like, this may never happen, right? But if we end up degrading the resilience and the capability to operate the water in a reliable way,
sure,
then we're actually countering what we're all trying to do. Let's not let the tail wag the dog.
Right. Do these utilities, do they normally work together outside of security in any other collaborative ways?
So, yeah, in some cases, if there's a utility that, has a pipe break and needs parts or things like that, there is a mutual aid that way.
Yeah.
Usually it's the larger utilities that sort of help out the smaller utilities, but they also, adjacent systems oftentimes have an interconnect with each other, so
right.
if they're down, they can, bring in water or supply water to their neighbor.
And are they geographically close to one another, the participating utilities? So
actually, no, we have a pretty good dispersion. Some western Mass, some southern Mass, and some in northern. And there was no need to be
it doesn't
regional.
really matter. Yeah. So what's like a common water architecture? I know you talked about some of this in the talk, and it's kind of eye-opening.
Yeah, right. So when you think about OT security, you think of the enterprise and the IT-OT boundary and large systems with lots of assets. And by and large in water, you don't see that. You see, standalone systems in water, like at a treatment plant, you'll have like an ISP modem that allows, remote access, maybe a firewall. We see firewalls fairly often, but they're usually configured not the greatest.
Sure.
Sometimes you just see a Soho router there. And then, we're talking about tens of PLCs and a couple of computers. Like, that's the extent of the technology we see that runs these systems.
Right. And so in terms of, like, what you're trying to address, is it just, shutting off remote access, for example, or is it deeper than that? Are you looking into vulnerabilities? Because, there's difficulties in patching and so forth. Like,
yeah, so we are trying to get to reasonable, eliminate easily exploitable, low-hanging fruit. So looking at the edge devices, we can't shut off remote access. For most of these utilities, they're not 24/7.
Right.
Even during the day, the operators need to get alarms like they're out in the field, and they need to be able to respond. So we can't shut off remote access, but what we can do is follow secure remote access principles, maybe not to the nth degree where we have like the complex jump server and multiple layers of authentication, but certainly multi-factor, individual user accounts, least privilege, and try to at least, a minimum baseline of reasonable and sustainable, and that and edge devices too, making sure firewalls are patched and up to date. So looking at those common TTPs for remote adversaries trying to gain access and manipulate things.
Yeah. You said edge devices a couple of times. There's been a lot of recent reporting and conversations around just the general insecurity of some of these edge devices and how they're being leveraged in attacks. It makes me wonder, like, these utilities, they're so kind of heads down on keeping the water clean and flowing. How aware are they of what's happening in the threat landscape? And just,
I would say by and large, they're not.
Yeah.
Even like utilities that I work with, they don't know Muleshoe happened. They don't know
Right.
Oldsmar happened, or did or didn't happen, whatever. And so, they're not aware. They know that they hear that there's things they need to be worried about, but they don't know what's real. And so, that's one of the things I try to do is like not overhype anything, but let's talk about what's real. Let's get to reasonable. And then where I like to go is addressing the biggest, most unacceptable risks to the water industry across the board.
And what do you think some of those might be?
So I think there's really essentially 4 unacceptable risks to water. Number 1 is manipulation of the treatment process to render the water chemically unsafe to drink. And not every water utility has that same risk, so it really is system to system. Number 2 is using the equipment that controls the flow of water, pumps, valves, things like that, to cause pressure surges or vacuums and damage pipes and vessels. Number 3 is these critical devices that you need to run the water, maybe a VFD that controls a motor that runs a pump, or an actuator, or a circuit breaker that's sitting on the network, and through cyber means you can brick that device so it's no longer functional, and it's not something that you can replace quickly and easily.
Right.
And so those are the 3. The 4th one is really water as a dependency to other critical infrastructure sectors like healthcare, like power. So if that gets interrupted, there's an interrelation there. So those are the 4 biggest risks. And to me, I'm not worried about ransomware. I'm more worried about what's going to cause the fundamental mission of water to be impacted. Fundamental mission of water being, provide clean, potable, treated water at sufficient pressure and volume to meet the demand.
Yeah.
That's it.
So I understand that there are some inherent fail-safes, backups that would kind of like prevent, some kind of dangerous chemical being, introduced into the water or too much of a particular chemical. How much does that kind of compensate for what a potential disruption might look like?
When the control system is running normally and we don't have like an ICS stage 2 level actor who can find their way into the PLC and manipulate that logic, those protections are in place, they've been in place, and we're safe. Like if somebody's just monkeying with the HMI and trying to change settings, like we saw at Muleshoe, then, we're fine. If you get an advanced actor who then gets into the PLC and can manipulate logic and make changes, now we're at a different place. And so some utilities are susceptible to that level of attack and some aren't, honestly.
Yeah. So just to go back to the collaborative among the 6 remaining utilities, what are some commonalities that you would hope they kind of reach across in terms of, shared threat models or things like that?
Right. So like I've already said a bunch of times, doing the basics, but then I think we need to be focused on having enough data to go threat hunting for sandworm-like and Volt Typhoon-type organizations who are, finding their way in, lying wait for some strategic reason to do harm, and they're not going to trip off anything, and we're not going to know they're there unless we go looking. And so we need to enable that data to be available, and then we need people with the skills to go and start looking for that.
Yeah.
That's where we need to be.
How much does an incident like, I believe it was Littleton in Massachusetts, didn't know much about Volt Typhoon, didn't know much about cybersecurity, how much can you bring something like that to the table and say, oh, here's something that can happen?
Absolutely, and we do. And I mean, that was a great example where, and they did such a good job about, handling all of that. All of a sudden they found themselves a relatively insignificant strategic value target being impacted by one of the most competent and capable adversaries. I absolutely refer to that because, it's real.
Yeah, they found themselves on 60 Minutes.
Totally.
So tell me about kind of like structurally how often you guys meet, what do you guys talk about, like typical agendas kind of thing? Yeah,
so we met fairly often in the beginning. Now we've gone to a quarterly meeting because honestly, we've got a lot of stuff in place, and we've built trust, and they know that we are doing the due diligence, monitoring, and looking for evidence of things. And so they don't want to meet too much. So we're at quarterly cycles. I am having conversations with other states, with other groups of utilities through rural water organizations that are interested in doing something similar. And I'm just hoping to get, a dispersion of utilities across the country get some visibility, get some basics in, so we can start to understand what the real threat is and the scope of the threat.
Sure. And I think it's obvious, but each one of these utilities kind of maintains like their own autonomy over.
Yes, that was one of the things. It's completely voluntary. Everybody's autonomous. We sort of standardized on how we wanted to do security, and everybody's trying to do it in their own way as long as they meet the intent of what we're trying to do.
I probably should have asked this at the beginning, but how long has this been going on? When did this start?
So we're about a year and a half in.
Okay.
It took a little while to get it going, and once we went up and running, the grant period ended in June, and we funded ourselves through the first year. So we're coming up on the end of this period, looking for funding to extend it. But it's honestly not that expensive to continue it. So we're hopeful.
So tell me about the grant process, because I think that would be kind of important for others to hear in this
situation.
So
in Massachusetts, and it's not there this year, but it's coming next, but in prior years it's there. It's the Community Compact. They have something called a Regionalization and Efficiency Grant. And so they were looking at innovative ways that organizations could either become more efficient using grant funds to fund a project, or different organizations joining together to regionalize and gain some efficiency and effectiveness there. And so it was a relatively easy process once we found out about it. We just had to write up sort of what the problems we're trying to solve are and how we're going to go about it. And and then once the grant ended, we had to submit the feasibility study that we did that explained the process we went through and the outcomes and things like that. It was pretty easy.
And was this a cyber grant, or was it just kind of a bigger overarching?
It was. It
wasn't
even technology, but it was really about regionalization and efficiency. And there was no cyber in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that they kind of saw the need for it.
Yeah. Credit to Massachusetts for looking for innovative solutions to solve problems,
So you, in your talk, identified 10 cyber controls that you guys are kind of working toward. You mentioned a couple of them already in terms of secure remote access, compensating controls. What are some of the others that you'd like to prioritize?
I mentioned remote access. I mentioned a little bit segmentation. We definitely tried to do some segmentation, configuring firewalls and separating, OT from IT, and making sure that the traffic crossing trust boundaries was only what we needed. And then documentation was one. You often find that the utilities kind of know what they have, but they don't have good documentation on an asset inventory or a wide area network diagram or data flow stuff. So we spent a little bit of time helping them develop that. We're trying to make sure they had good backup, so we reached out to their vendors, their systems integrators, to get copies of the PLC programs and things like that. Put it on a hard drive so they could stick it in a drawer, so when they need it, they have it. That kind of thing. We also looked a little bit at, centralized logging to make sure we're capturing the data we need so we can go do threat hunting or do incident response if necessary. We looked at vulnerabilities, and not like a full-scale vulnerability program that you might see at a large organization, but let's make sure the perimeter is secure. Let's make sure we're doing some patching, and then we're watching for any critical vulnerabilities that may, say there's an active exploit on a particular firewall. We want to know that.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff we're doing. And then the last one that I would say that's really important, and I don't know why I list it last because it's almost first, but incident response planning, right? So being ready when your defenses fail and you have pre-planned steps to be efficient in your response.
Yeah, it's almost a cliche to say you need one, but a lot of orgs just don't, or at least don't train on them and don't kind of run them through every 6 months or whatever.
Totally. And for water, the America Water Infrastructure Act of 2018 required that any organization that serves 3,300 households or more needed to have an all hazards emergency response plan that included cyber. That was back in 2018.
Yeah.
It's coming for refresh now. And what we find as we look at them is they don't really cover OT, they don't really cover operations, and that's one thing we're trying to fix.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up documentation. I'm wondering, I'm hearing about it in other critical infrastructure where people are kind of aging out, retiring, moving on, and they're like there's a real knowledge loss that's happening.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing that in water?
So much. There's a real challenge to get water operators to join the fold, and these like long-time experts are leaving, and they're leaving before we can grab that institutional knowledge, and we're in a bit of trouble with that across the country. Yeah.
And is it just a matter of kind of like shortcuts that these folks know and have been doing for 20 years, or is it actually like, we don't know where the manual is kind of thing?
Well, I guess it's a little bit of both. Documentation is poor, and not everywhere. Some places are really good, but it's these guys who know that, like, when this happens, we need to do this, and they really understand on a fundamental level how that system works, and when something fails, they know how to, work around or fix it. That's getting lost, unfortunately.
Sounds like a lot of this conversation, too, is about resilience. And
absolutely.
What does it mean to you when you hear that word, and how does it apply in water?
So, I would say by and large, water is pretty resilient historically for things like weather events and, normal failures. Pipe breaks, they can fix it in hours, or, we get a snowstorm or a hurricane. They know how to staff and handle that. And it's the same principle apply. Like, how can you keep that critically important system running in a challenging environment? And that includes cyber. If you're degraded for some reason, are you able to run in hand? Are you able to keep things flowing to the greatest extent possible? And they're pretty good at those other ways, and we just need to extend that out a little bit.
Just to go back to the do no harm and security monitoring, I mean, makes a lot of people in OT nervous to introduce any kind of monitoring onto the network, whether it's active or passive. Just kind of, I'm wondering, what's the situation in water? Is it the same kind of attitude? Is there a hesitancy? And then, where does that data go? Does it go to the cloud? Does it go to the vendor? Does it go to the integrator?
So the first question is yes, there's definitely a lot of hesitancy about their data and where it goes. And in this case, yes, we use cloud. So we capture the data on a local device that's in a DMZ. So we have firewall rules to send it to a pre-hardened sensor. And then that sensor is allowed to send the data to the cloud. And we did that as hardened and as secure as possible because we didn't want to introduce an attack vector. However, the value of that data being able to be looked at and tracked is more beneficial than the very low potential that somebody's going to use that as an avenue back in.
Right.
They have so many other weaknesses that, this is not the one.
Yeah, it's more about disrupting.
Absolutely.
Introducing something that disrupts.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about additional regulation? It seems like, I don't know if it would help or hurt. What's your perspective?
So I actually think, I'm not a huge regulation guy, but I actually think in this case they really need it.
Yeah.
And some states are coming out independently with their own regulations. There's, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey. There's a bunch of states that have stuff coming out. At the federal level, there's some stuff happening in Congress, although it's a bit stalled right now. But I think we need it because that is what gives these organizations the ammunition they need to go and get the funding. Right now, all of this stuff we're doing is based on grant funds. It's just not a sustainable way to do business. They need to be in the operations budget, but those regulations need to be tempered to get basics, not go all the way and be out of balance with some of the needs of normal water operations.
Right. Yeah, I mean, regulation ends up being a mandate to spend money, and if they don't have it,
right,
it doesn't work, right? I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of these organizations need to go to town meeting to get their budget approved. If they don't have a regulation saying we need to do this, then they're up against a new ambulance, the school budget and things like that.
Or folks in the town that just don't know enough about cyber to think it's a
100%.
real risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why, I mean, it's still kind of sad, but we're still a very reactive industry overall in terms of cybersecurity. And
true.
It takes an incident.
I think the one thing we have going for us is, number one, they're resilient. Number two, there's 55,000 of them, community water systems.
Yeah.
And number, so I think that we're not in a dire emergency situation, but we are in a situation where it's time to fix it.
Right. And I mean, we've got to be smart about the incidents that do happen. Like the mule shoot thing just wasn't a big deal. Even Oldsmar ended up not being a cyber incident, apparently, depending on what you read. But you can't introduce fear and then it's a nothing burger.
100%. An overflowing tank is something that happens all the time.
Sure.
The impact. I will say though, that actor had, with the level of access that they had, they could have done far worse.
Right.
They just chose to be willy-nilly pressing some buttons and made
See
something
what happens.
happen. Yeah.
All right, so last question, just in terms of building this collaboration and getting these utilities together, talk about some lessons learned. What worked, what didn't, something you wouldn't do again, something you'd recommend others try?
So from the recommend, I think what I found here is this one-to-many approach where we take somebody from our community working with multiple organizations to try to move it in a direction. There's an efficiency there, and like most of the people in the OT security community really care, and I think they're willing to do it. I think that's a win, and I like it a lot. I think one of the challenges we're running up against is sometimes the organizations that are building these systems, engineers or the systems integrators, they need to be convinced that this is something they need to be worried about. And I've had a number of respectful conversations where we try to say that this is real, and we learn from each other. Like where I think, oh, this is a problem, the systems integrator is like, you really can't do that, and we may go back and forth, and sometimes it's like, all right, we're just gonna agree to disagree here, and
So let's wrap up. What's coming down the road, maybe in the next year for this collaboration? What do you hope to see happen?
Well, we're hoping to get funding to continue it on to round 2.
Yep.
And then I'm hoping to get some traction and some other states start to take the same approach. There's a lot of folks in this community who could really do some help. Like just so you know, like I was funded while the grant was in process, but now the work I'm doing is pro bono, and I'm totally happy with that. I love it. I've built relationships with these organizations, and we're just trying to I think the community's open to that.
Yeah. All right. Congratulations. Great work. Good luck with the round 2.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.